We are no longer talking about art healing the sick, but about the art of the sick healing the healthy. It must bring us out of our delusions, confront us with our own mortality, and mobilize a shared sense of humanity. This doesn't mean that the sick person becomes some kind of an ideal or that pain should be considered sacred or beautiful. Rather, it means that the absence of sickness is an absence of a significant part of reality. The sick know the world of the healthy, but the healthy don't know the world of the sick. My name is Emma Holten. I'm an author and a speaker, and I work with the care economy and feminist economics. And in 2024, I published my debut book, Deficit, called Underskud in Danish, which is about the cultural history of care work and how we have looked at care and the people who do it and the people who need it in the past, give or take 500 years. I think the kind of central point in Deficit is that, so we're at this stage in the economy, especially in our part of the world, what we typically call the Western world. We're in Denmark right now, where we are just so rich. I think it is almost impossible to understand from a global standpoint the amount of money and wealth circulating in our societies. Yet we're seeing so much mental suffering. Lots of depression, lots of anxiety, lots of, I think there was this newspaper here in Denmark who called it a friendship recession, meaning, we are terrible at human relationships. And I think I was very interested in that paradox. Why are we not able to translate all this wealth, all this richness into something that feels good on the body and the mind? And I think researching that question, what I found was that all of the work and all of the activities and actions that traditionally have been done by women, which means caring for the body and the mind, being socially intelligent, nurturing relationships, is something that in political economy today has very little value, and in politics today has very little value. So we don't prioritize it, we don't give resources to it. Actually, we talk about it as an expense. So we say, can we afford care? Instead of saying, can we afford to not have care? And of course, the reason it's called feminist economics is because women traditionally have done and still do spend much more time doing these kinds of tasks. And I'm interested in how we've looked at them. And what I find is that basically since the inception of economics in the 1500s, Western philosophy has just been terrible, honestly, at thinking about sickness, childhood, breastfeeding, birth, families. They've been so preoccupied with this alone individual out in society, voting, thinking, rationalizing. But the times in our lives when we need other people and need connection with other people and how important it is to us has been very absent. And I think we're really suffering the consequences of that. And what I do in Deficit is that I show that this not only happens on like a philosophical and a cultural level, but right down to the models that are being used in finance ministries all over the world today. We see nurses, schools, elder care, care for the disabled, we see it as an expense and not as something value creating. And I think it's costing us a lot on a human level. Yeah, I think that's the big, obviously, the huge question. How can we change it? I think many people reading Deficit leave the book feeling frustrated and angry. But I do think that there is a very hopeful core in the book, which is that I think that most of us grow up thinking that economics or political economy as we know it is kind of like physics or chemistry. So you cannot criticize it, you cannot argue for something new because it just is the way it is. But what I show in the book is that it's not like that at all. There is a plethora of ways we can make a society, build a hospital, build a school, how we can organize a local community. What is a good economy is about what is a good life. That's the question we need to ask. And I think for a long time, we've been very good at asking, how can we have a better economy? But we kind of forgot to ask, but will what we call a good economy actually provide what we call a good life. So I think there is a hopeful sentiment, which is that, you know, what has been built by people can be changed by people. And a lot of what I'm criticizing in the book are institutions, and they're not natural laws, they're not set in stone, we can change them. But it is certainly a big ship, and I think we're going to need everyone on board for sure. Many of us have this idea that there's, you know, culture and art and identity, that's over here, and then there's politics and economics, and that's over here, and they're quite separate. But what I show in my book is that economy and culture are super, super closely related. So, for example, one thing that was interesting to me is that when the economy changes, typically our view of women change. So, for example, in the 40s and 50s, when women were mostly, a lot of them were confined to the home, were living as second-class citizens, we had an idea in Danish culture of a woman as almost like a child. So she was not allowed to handle money. She was not allowed, like she was not, you know, giving access to politics in the same way, etc. But then suddenly in the 60s and 70s, the economy changes and it starts to grow really a lot. And we suddenly need women to work in the economy. And what happens is that we get a completely new view of women. Suddenly women are these octopi with 8 arms, and they can, you know, be on the phone to work with one arm and have a baby in another, and, you know, make food in the third, and, you know, handle her husband's, you know, washing up on a fifth, the fourth. And suddenly we get this woman as multitasker figure. So I think the idea that we can separate political economy and how we organize the economy from culture is quite absurd. And what I show in the book is also that the other way around, what we have found to be valuable in economic sciences, what has gotten the most attention, what has been deemed most important, is also extremely affected by culture. So in economics historically, you have not gotten a lot of status on researching women's role in the home or in the economy, not a lot of, you know, nice professorships, funding, etc. on researching care, and of course that's cultural. So I think what I really wanted to show is that, you know, this perfect delineation between politics and culture, it's not as clear as we think. And the things that we call rational or logical that look that way on the outside because it's loads of numbers and math or whatever, actually within that math and within those numbers, there's a lot of culture and a lot of tradition and history hidden. But of course, it's difficult to see in a spreadsheet 600 years of history. You gotta put on your like detective's glass and look for it. I think life angst is something that I'm very intimately familiar with. I think I certainly have a tendency to be quite an anxious person. I think most sensitive people have a relationship to the sense of anxiety or dread or nervousness. And I think what I really enjoyed about when many of the pieces in this collection or in this new exhibition is that it also deals a lot with sickness and the realization that someday we will die, and grappling with that fact. And I think both in my own life, but obviously also in my work, I'm very interested in the vulnerability of the body. I think one of the central analyses in deficit is the fact that we, most of our lives, and especially in kind of wider culture, are in extreme denial about the vulnerability of the body. So if we're sick, we'll hide it away. If a person develops dementia or is disabled or has a chronic illness that makes their body look different or act different, we will often hide it away in the home or in an institution. We really don't want to see it. I think seeing sickness gives a lot of people life anxiety. And I think what I wrote about in the piece was what can we learn from sickness? How can it make us enrich our understanding of life? And I think working with care, I obviously work a lot with people who perform care, so take care of sick bodies, for example. But I think the devaluation of care in society really also, in a huge way, affects the people who need care. And of course, when you're very anxious, one of the best ways you can get out of that is through connection with others and receiving care and giving care to others. My own relationship with art, that's a good question. I think art is extremely important in my life. It is the only place where I go to do something that has no concrete purpose. So mostly when I work, I have to do a product, make a text or a speech or whatever, but I go to art, TV series, literature, sculpture, not to gain anything specific from it. And I think that's the most important role that art plays in my life, is to not play a concrete role, but to always be there as something I can return to and get something new from. Yeah, I think art has meant a lot in my development, and especially in my thought. I think I use art a lot. It figures in deficit all the time because it becomes an expression of who we are at any given moment, and what we are preoccupied with what we think about. So for me, art obviously says something about who made it, but it also always says something about the time in which it was made. How did people look at women, for example, is obviously one of the things that has mattered a lot to me. So if you look at a painting or a sculpture of a woman, I'll notice, what is she wearing? What is she doing? How does she look? And I think in looking at that, you can actually get learn a lot of what the status of a woman was at the time. I think I really love the Jorn quote, "Sickness into life." I was diagnosed with a chronic illness when I was 27 called ulcerative colitis, an autoimmune illness that I'm going to have for the rest of my life. And I think many people, have this extremely deterministic idea of sickness, that the sick life is a poor life. And that it is a life that is worth less than other types of lives because you're limited in some sort of ways. There are things you can't do, can't eat, can't go, whatever your sickness takes from you or gives to you. But I think for me, becoming sick, it taught me so much. It brought me into a community of other people with illnesses, which turns out is almost all of us have something. It made me empathize with the position of not being able to do everything you want at any time, which is a hugely important thing to learn in your life and puts you in a position of prioritizing. And I think that I think I write in my text that the sick know the life of the healthy, but the healthy don't know the life of the sick. And I think about that a lot, that if you are, perfectly healthy and you can move around, completely unimpeded and the entire world is built for you, you are in some sorts of ways the truly blind one. You're the one who is not seeing what is actually going on. And I think, becoming sick certainly made me a better feminist, certainly made me probably a better writer. And I think that there is just a lot to learn from that position about life and about the body and how it works. And I think that's something that I really appreciate about a lot of pieces in this exhibition, is that they are about the sick position as a productive place to speak from and a productive place to look at the world from. And I think we all have a lot to learn. I've been really fortunate in my work that I get to meet a lot of people who work in the care sector. So one of the assumptions in both in politics in many ways, and in our culture, but certainly in some strains of economics, is this idea that people are primarily driven by their own self-interest. So if you can make a lot of money, you're going to do that, and you'll do what's best for you. But when you meet people who work in the care sector, you understand that for many people, doing well for others is also doing well for themselves. And I think that we have sometimes this idea that if I do something for you, or I have a job which is, aiding and helping others, then I'm losing something. I'm losing time. I'm not gaining something. But I think from those people, I've really learned that giving care can also be the same as receiving care. And I'm not positioning them as heroes or anything. I think their job is a job like any other job. But I think what I have learned is that there is something amazing to be gained from spending time on caring for others. And the mathematics of giving and taking are not so simple as we think. And I think as soon as I start thinking about care, it opens my eyes to the fact that actually, even in my opinion, in a society that can be quite hostile to care, you don't get paid that much for it, you don't have time for it. Sometimes you're even looked down upon. I think we can all agree that people who work in the care sector are not celebrated or highly valued in our society. Yet people continue to do care. People continue to have children and see their friends and do volunteer work and do work in these sectors. So I actually constantly see the human drive towards giving to others. People make art even though they make like no money from it, for the joy of giving something to others and expressing themselves. So I actually see resistance to a careless society all over the place. I constantly see it. And as soon as you see that there's actually potential to build in that desire within people to connect with others. And I think that gives me a lot of hope.